Now that we got the tabs working, we can also work on this favorites feature. And for that, it should be possible to visit this meal details screen. And here I want to have a button that allows me to mark this meal as a favorite. And to allow users to mark a meal as an item, I'll go to this meal details Dart file where we have the meal details screen. And there in the app bar, I want to add some actions, or one action to be precise. I want to add an icon button as an action, which can be used to mark a meal as a favorite. Now for that, of course, we'll have to do something once this is pressed. But then we also have to add an icon here. And the icon should actually change based on whether this meal already is a favorite or not. For a start, I'll simply create an icon widget here, which is set to icons.star. And we can set this to const, though we will change this logic later anyways. Now with that, we'll have this icon here at the top, which is nice. And when we tap this button, this meal here should either be saved as a favorite or should be removed from the favorites list. And this, of course, means that we need to manage some state somewhere in this application. We need to manage a list of meals or meal IDs or anything like that that have been marked as a favorite. But where should we manage this list? Well, not inside of this meal details screen, because if we would manage this state in here, we would not have access to it from inside other widgets. And we do need this information, which meals are a favorite or not, in the tabs screen, for example. Because here we are displaying the meals screen and we're passing the meals that should be rendered on that meals screen to it. And since we're rendering the meals screen as the favorites screen here, in the end, we want to pass all the favorite meals to the meals screen in this place. So therefore we need access to the information which meals are marked as favorites in this tabs screen widget. Of course, the state is manipulated from inside meal details though. So therefore we'll have to make sure that we create a function that adds or removes favorites here in tabs screen state, but we'll have to pass this function down to meal details, so that when this icon button is pressed there, we actually change the state in the tabs screen. So we're lifting the state up in the end, something we have done many times before in this course and which we will do again here. So for that here, we can add a final list of meals, and it can be final because we'll never reassign this property, which I'm about to add here. And this property can be called favorite meals. And initially it's an empty list. And meal also should be imported, so you should add this import from the models folder. So this list is empty initially, but of course now we can add a new function, which could be called toggle meal favorite status, because this function should either add a meal to the list or remove the meal. It should be one function that does both. And here I expect to get a meal as a parameter. And then in this function, we need to find out whether this meal here is already part of this list, in which case it should be removed, or if it's not part, in which case it should be added. Now we can use different approaches to determine whether this meal is part of this list or not. And one simple, straightforward way of determining this is to add a variable isExisting. And in this variable, I want to store true or false. But of course, that should be derived dynamically, which I can do by taking a look at favorite meals and then calling contains, a built-in method that you can call on any list, to check whether favorite meals contains this meal which I'm getting here. If it does, this will return true, otherwise it will return false. And now we can check if isExisting is true, or as a shortcut we can also just write isExisting, since this already stores true or false, and if wants true or false, so that's all we have to write. checking like this would be redundant. So here I'm checking if is existing is true in the end. And if it is true, it means we have to remove the meal. So in this case, I want to access favorite meals and call remove and remove the meal. And otherwise, I'll access favorite meals and call add and add that meal to the favorites. And this is all we have to do here. This will make sure that a meal is added or removed. So now that we have this function, we have to get it to the meal details screen, because that is in the end where it should be triggered when this icon button here is pressed. The problem, of course, is that the tabs screen doesn't have direct access to the meal details screen. Instead, the tabs screen only has access to the categories and meals screen. But both these screens ultimately reach the meal details screen. I mean, inside of the meals screen, we simply do push the meal details screen. So here we could pass a pointer to this toggle meal favorite status function to the meal details screen. But in order to be able to pass a pointer to this function to the meal details screen from inside the meals screen, we first have to pass this function from the tabs screen to the meals screen. And later, as a second step, also through the categories screen to the meals screen, because that's another place where the meals screen is used. And of course, passing a pointer to a function through multiple layers of widgets like this is a bit annoying, but that's why we're going to learn about an alternative approach in the next course section. Nonetheless, this is an important pattern, which you will also see and use a lot, and therefore we're going to learn about it here. So in meal details screen, in the end, I expect to have a property which will be a function actually, so which will hold a function as a value that could be called on toggle favorite. And this here should be a function that in the end then gets a meal as an input, the meal that should be added or removed as a favorite. So therefore here in meal detail screen, we have to require this on toggle favorite parameter to then set the function that we receive on this parameter as a value for this property. And then here on the icon button, inside of this anonymous function, we can call on toggle favorite and pass our meal as a value to it. So this meal which we store in this property, because on toggle favorite will be a function that wants a meal, hence we pass this meal as an argument. Now inside of the meals screen, we now have to make sure that we pass such a function to meal details, because meal details wants this on toggle favorite parameter which wants such a function. And since we use meal details screen in the meals screen, it's this place where we have to provide this function. Of course, we don't have this function here though, we have it in the tabs screen instead, and therefore in the end, in this meals screen, we also just have to register such an extra property and require this extra parameter on toggle favorite, just so that we can forward it to meal details screen. Because there indeed we can now add on toggle favorite and set it to this on toggle favorite property that we have here. So now with that, we have to make sure that we pass this function, which we now want to get here in meals screen on this parameter, to the meals screen. So from inside the tabs screen, where we create the meals screen, we now have to set on toggle favorite, and here we finally can now set it to this toggle meals favorite status function that we create here. So with that, we're in the end creating a chain along which we pass a pointer to this function through multiple layers of widgets. Now we have to remove const here, but with that we will pass this function to the meals screen and through the meals screen in the end to the meal details screen. And there in the meal details screen, we then call it when this icon button is pressed. That's what we're doing here. Now, of course, we're also using this meals screen in the categories screen. So therefore there, we also have to accept such a function property. So we have to add it as a property and accept it as a parameter, I mean. And this must be a required parameter. Here I also must import the meal model. So this import here is required to make this meal type available in this file. And now, since we get this function here and store it in this property in the categories screen, we can set onToggleFavorite on the meals screen and pass this stored value in this property that's also named onToggleFavorite to onToggleFavorite on the meals screen. And I know this can be confusing. We're passing a function through multiple widgets here, but right now it's the only way of doing this. It's the only way of getting a function that's defined in this tabs screen to the meal details screen. As mentioned, we'll learn about a different, leaner approach in the next course section. But with that, we're almost done. Now, as a last step, we just have to go back to the tabs screen and there set a value for the onToggleFavorite parameter, which we just added there, this parameter which wants this function. And finally, we therefore now can also use our toggleMealFavorite status function here as a value for this parameter for the categories screen. And we have to remove const here. And with that all, we now have the logic in place to add or remove meals as favorites and to trigger that logic from inside the meal details screen. Now, of course, we have to make sure that we also output any favorites we might have set here on the favorites screen. And that's what we'll do as a next step.